Hi, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. Children are the most vulnerable individuals in our society, and to protect them is, of course, the responsibility of those who care for them, and the largest responsibility often falls on the parents. On today's show, we take a look at a very important issue that many parents battle with: how to help your child establish physical boundaries. Now, a child needs to be aware of how their body and physical space is their own, and it's important to carefully teach them just that. We talk about this in greater depth. Joining us for this discussion today is Professor Hayat, who's a neurologist at St. Louis Medical University in the United States. She joins us from Perth. Also joining us today is Wajiha Faraz, who's a parent and has 2 daughters. She joins us from Dubai. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Professor Ghazala, Hayat, now let me begin with you. Children and them having to be able to know that their bodies are their own, for them to be able to establish certain physical boundaries. How important is that for the mental and emotional development of a child?
So first, I'm very glad that you are addressing this issue. It's such an important issue, and what has happened is, growing up in Pakistan, nobody discussed this. And it's important that we start talking about this at very young age. Because once we start talking about they have already learned something from outside, from some, then this, like what you're talking about, creating these boundaries is very hard for them. They're getting mixed messages. Probably the best age, they're saying, even before 4 years of age, you should be talking to your child, and even before that, what are private parts of your body? And we talk in a healthy manner, not there's something wrong with these things, and nobody else has to touch them. And also at the same time teach them that nobody else should ask them to touch their private parts. And only person is your mom or whoever. Create those boundaries and create that kind of trust that the child feels comfortable and safe coming to the parents about what, these are like that his or her body and nobody can touch it.
Right. Professor Hayat, now you mentioned here that this education and this awareness should begin with a child even before they're 4 years of age. Now, just take us through when a child's mind starts to develop. When can they begin to distinguish between what is right and wrong? From what age onwards?
So, this is right and wrong. Usually by age 2, 3, they start knowing. We tell them, okay, did you do this? Do you think was right or not? Did this, but that wrong? They understand simple concept. But if they do not know about private parts or somebody touching them, what's happening, they might not know if it's right and wrong. I have seen children at age 3, they will ask that my private parts are why they're different from like a boy, a girl asking me. And I was surprised at age 3, she had this insight what's different. And the mother in front of me described in a very clear way, this is his private parts, like you have yours. And we covered those. At this time, we're covering with the diaper. So they will know at that time that this is a private. They will not know at that age if somebody starts touching it inappropriately or the sexual abuse, that this is right and wrong. And these, unfortunately, I'd still call them evil people who abuse children. They will use different tactics, either bribe them or give them some gifts or try to scare them. So child will not know that what they're doing it, if not telling parents it's right and wrong. They might think it's the right thing because somebody else is telling me not to do it.
Right. Now, we're talking about a number of important things, and we're, of course, trying to deal with issues of how to spread more awareness about child abuse and many other things. And we're going to continue talking about how this can be done in a relatable manner for children, in a manner which children understand. But before that, I want to jump to Ms. Faraz and talk to her about what we're having. Now, this conversation, this parents teaching their children what is bad touch, what is good touch, this is, of course, a difficult conversation to be had. As a parent, do you feel like there are certain things that pop in your mind as questions of what the boundaries need to be in this conversation, what you should say, what you shouldn't say?
First thing that I would like to add to the whole conversation is that we don't take the little children as humans. Most of the times back in Pakistan, it's a child is born and it's more taken as a toy. What we usually do is we don't let them decide. We don't let their decision power made. If the child doesn't know what to do with at what time, they will not be able to say no when it's the right time to say no. I hope I'm making some sense with this. But the thing is that as soon as the child starts sitting, if you put few things in front of the child, he will pick one thing up. That's his decision thing, his decision making. If we keep on developing such behavior, the child knows how to take decisions. Decision making does not mean that, oh yes, I have to go to this university or this school for studying and the parents are creating this. No, you cannot go. The basic things, the small basic things that the children need to know. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the 75% of a child's personality develops within first 3 years of a child since birth. And then after the whole life, 25%, they just furnish, they just polish the same things that are developed over there. Children see, children do. If as a parent, we are enforcing, like, we are just implementing the same things. We are respecting their boundaries. We are not touching them uselessly. They will learn that this is not right. They will respond to it when they will not feel easy. The smallest thing, like tickling a child laugh, that is just a reflex action of the tickling. It does not mean that the child is enjoying it. It does not mean the child is being happy on that. It might be really irritating the child. It might be really annoying
Ms. Faraz, you're
the
making an important point there, that there are some reflex things that are seen generally as being harmless, but a child might not enjoy them. They might feel discomfort, might not want those things, those unwanted actions. Professor Ghazala, Hayat, on that point, now children are developing their minds. They have young, impressionable minds. They also not always are able to communicate what they're feeling. How early on can a child begin to feel discomfort or when they're feeling uncomfortable, or what we talk about, the sixth sense or the radars of being able to detect bad vibes and bad feelings from people?
Very early age, 3 to 4 years of age, they might not be able to communicate with you, but you can look at their facial expression. You know how many times I've seen parents, oh, go and hug that person, and child is just kind of a little bit, pulling back. Or you can look at the facial expression and we just say, oh, behave yourself, go and give a hug to this uncle or do this, that, or this. We are their spokesperson at that time. We are their protector. So 3, 4 years of age, you will feel, and you will see maybe a young girl in front of some male relative and very uncomfortable and just like quiet anything. Those should be red flags. If you see you get any vibe, your child, you respect what he or she wants. If they are don't want to do it, I fully agree. Tickling, a mom doing it, but that does not mean anybody, because then we're giving another person this, you can go and touch my child anytime you want. And then child is getting tickled and they're crying and we know they're upset about it. And then parents just try to be nice. They're kind of justifying, no, it's okay. Let uncle do this. Let grandparent do this. Or somebody else who is visiting.
And Professor Hayat, you're really talking about this idea that is the idea of consent. Now, we all have inherent consent, and we should have consent to give that consent for anyone to approach us or for to allow anyone to get into our personal space. Now, when you don't tell a child that they have consent over their bodies, long-term impacts, what are those when a child grows older, when they enter their teenage years?
So let me make sure I understand that the child did not have consent and somebody has violated him or her. Is that what you're saying in later on, or even a teenager?
If we don't teach a child that they have consent, or the idea of consent, or that they have a right over their body, they have a right to say no. If we don't teach a child that concept, what happens in the long term?
Just first thing is that creates a lot of, this is when they have anxiety, depression, because they feel like that this is their part and they're being, even if nobody touches them, they feel like they're being violated emotionally. That's how these children can go into shell. They can become depressed, everything. And worst thing is, even the worst is that other people can take advantages of, because they do not know how to defend themselves. They will feel like, okay, there will always be something, okay, it's not my space, or maybe I'm doing something wrong. And most of the time, we need to make sure our families, everybody understands this abuse is almost over 80% of the times is committed by the people the children know, the teenager know. It's not some stranger. So there's that kind of a relationship. They're not comfortable. They don't know it's their own space. They don't know. We don't even teach them how to say no. And once you don't know that, you cannot exercise that. And then that's how we end up with lots of, we see this pornography, rapes and all those things. The older the person becomes, it's not related to only Pakistan. It's, this.
It's truly a global phenomenon.
The world. It's the same. Right. If you don't teach the children, they will continue with that kind of, they would not know which one is the safe area.
Right. Ms. Faraz, now, we were talking about this and you mentioned something that we don't treat children like humans, like little humans. In this, of course, is disregarding their feelings, disregarding their tantrums or what they're saying as, no, I don't want to do this. Yes, I do want to do this. How do you as a parent maneuver through that? Sometimes children can be irrational, but sometimes they are giving out messages that they might not be able to voice in clear words, but they're saying that through their actions and other little things. How do you as a parent try to maneuver through that?
Okay. First thing, I would just like to add few things which you asked doctor here. The thing that you asked about what are the longer term impacts of this consent, I would just like to add that when we are mentoring the little ones, we don't let them decide, and we are not giving them the right of consent. We are making them submissive, and once they grow up, especially in girls, what happens is they end up in most of the times the abusive relationships. They are supposed to carry it forward. Marital rape takes place because the girl doesn't even know that she has a right. She can say no to this person. She does not know the consent, what she can do and what she cannot. Being the mother of, now coming to my question, being the mother of my two girls, whenever being a parent, you always know, if you're fully involved in your children's upbringing, you know that which child is of which nature. Not all children are same, and not all children can be treated in the same way. My elder one is a very introvert, a submissive, not a submissive, but a very shy kind of a girl. My little one, she is a complete extrovert, and she would just tell everyone what she wants. So these are two different, and I have to be two different people with both of my girls, with the elder one and the younger one. What I do is whenever they want something, I sit with them, I talk to them, and I tell them, okay, if you do this, this is what will happen. If you will do this, this is what will happen. You will choose and decide what you want. This is how they learn to take decisions. This is how they are. I'm asking for their consent that, okay, you have a right to do what you want to do. Sometimes one is in the pajamas, we are going out somewhere, one is in her sleeping pajamas, and one is dressed up the way she wants to. I don't say anything to them as long as it's not harming them.
Right.
And then when it's about the bodily consent, what I do is when I'm a working mom, I have my own things to do, I work. But for my girls, I have no helper at home. I take care of them myself. I give them bath myself. And every single time when I give them bath, I bring down my vocabulary to the minimum which they can understand. Easy words, small words, and then I tell them, this is, you're not going to let anyone touch this place.
Right.
In a very different way, not very open, but not very...
But you talk
like
them
they cannot
through it.
understand.
That's the important thing, that you're having that conversation. Mr. Ghazala, Hayat, now you mentioned something, and I want to go back to it because it is something that is essential and very important to talk about. You mentioned certain red flags that parents need to be aware of when their child, whether it's a girl or a boy, is acting in a certain way. What other red flags are there that that tell a parent that something is wrong? They need to inquire about the situation. They need to ask their child a little more about the situation.
So it could be simple that we say the child is not himself. You're just staying in their room a lot. They're not talking to. They stop eating. They start slipping in their grades in school. Or teacher. Another thing, I think in our country, we also have to work with our educator that they are also very vigilant about this. If they see a student who's very quiet has suddenly changed, or there's change in behaviors, not playing with the other friends, or sometimes they can become aggressive, or they become, that's how they're showing their insecurity and everything. Those are all red flags that there's something else is going on. Then the parents need to talk to them. The first initial, which I talked about it, that you say, okay, go and give this person or uncle a hug. And you see that even if they're becoming a little bit stiff, I think that is a red flag. That even if there's nothing wrong going on, we have to stop it there. We have to respect our child's wishes. That's what he or she feels. I'm going to respect that.
Right. Another thing that is important to talk about in all of this is how parents play a role in allowing children to understand that their body is their own. And this, of course, goes to what happens in the household. I'm talking about punishment, whether it's physical punishment, whether it's yelling or a timeout. Professor Ghazala, Hayat, now there is a lot of literature, there is a lot of debate about physical punishment, whether parents should indulge in it or not, when it should be allowed, when it shouldn't be allowed. But let's talk about the impacts of that.
So that's a very good point. There are studies showing that physical punishment, whipping the child and all those, which is very common. Growing up, I think that was just part of day-to-day life, that breaks down that barrier. That's my space. When you're spanking your child 3 or 4 years old, it's like their bodily, we're crossing, even if I'm being a mother or father, or let's say grandparents, you're crossing that line. That kind of muddles what they feel like, what's their own, what's is not. They feel like, okay, anybody can come and hit me, and that is like a slippery slope. In the West, what I have seen, physical and all those is basically completely gone. I think we have to have boundaries, timeouts, and taking away the toys or all those things. Those are good. If we start very early in the age, this is right, this is wrong, if you're going to do this, if you didn't listen to me 3 times, you're not going to be able to play with your favorite toy for 1 week. Most of the children would listen to that. We do not have to resort to the physical for little things. You're not finished your meal, just start spanking them. Or you didn't do your homework, start spanking them. You're breaking down those boundaries. That's child's own private space. We have to respect that too.
Right. And that central point, one that Professor Ghazala Hayat makes right now, and Ms. Wajiha Faraz also reiterated and reinforced previously when she stated that when you allow a child's physical boundaries to be put down at a certain situation, at a certain time, when you allow their defenses to go down, when you tell them that something is acceptable, that has tremendous impact in their lives afterwards as well. On that point, I'd like to thank Professor Ghazala Hayat for joining us from Perth and Wajiha Faraz for joining us from Dubai. We're going to go for a short break. When we return, we're going to have another story for you. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. Now, children express themselves in different ways. Some children may express their thoughts and emotions in the form of anger and aggression, While this is natural, on today's show, we discuss how parents should deal with these acts of aggression and anger, and when should parents identify it as a problem that might persist in the future. Joining us to talk about this is Yasir Ali, who's a therapist and mental health counselor working here from Lahore. Also joining us is Professor Peter Kinderman, who's a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Liverpool. He joins us from Liverpool. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Professor Kinderman, let me begin with you, and let me begin with a very, very basic question. How do children's young minds process emotions differently than those that the adult mind does?
Children obviously need to do a lot of development in their childhood, and the way that very young children think and the way that adults think is substantially different. A lot of psychologists, psychiatrists, pediatricians have studied the way in which child development happens, and there are different theories, of course, and people are still doing research. Children are very sophisticated, but they think in ways that are different to adults, and especially abstract concepts such as even truth, but certainly the way in which they understand rules and what's right and wrong and what's good and bad change through time. So young children think in very concrete terms. They express their emotions in terms of how they feel and what they want. As they grow up, they learn rules in terms of what they should and shouldn't do until, it's not until people are in their teens that they start thinking in terms of what's right and what's wrong, ideas of justice, ideas of do unto other people as you would want them to do to you. Very young children think in very concrete terms. Their attention span is very short, and their idea of the consequences of their actions is very different to adults. So we have to be understanding of children's emotions and sometimes their temper tantrums.
Professor Kinderman, children, and I'm talking about very young children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, are they able to identify what they're feeling? Or is it possible that they conflate a bunch of emotions and that then comes out in the form of anger or aggression or something else?
Well, certainly. And children, because children's use of language is less developed, children often find it difficult to find the words to express how they're feeling. So if they're frustrated or angry, or if adults have let them down or have told them things that turn out not to be true, it's very difficult for children to sit there quietly and calmly, wait for a pause in the conversation and say, by the way, Dad, I've got something to raise with you. Last week you said something to me and I'm still a little bit annoyed because when I checked, it turned out not to be quite true. Can I ask you why you didn't say the truth? They can't express themselves in those terms. Suppressing their emotions and their desires are difficult. Waiting is difficult. Taking turns is difficult. So then for children to just wait until they can talk about things is tricky for them. Then you've got to factor in the fact that concepts such as responsibilities and different people have different perspectives, turn-taking, the idea that not everybody might share your point of view, these are all incredibly difficult for children. I think, therefore, that what we need to do is instead of expecting children to have adult abilities to control their emotions, we need to meet children on their level. We need to take time to help them express the things that are difficult for them as children.
Right, and we're going to dig deeper into that central question. How can parents help children express themselves better? But before that, I want to jump to Yasir. Yasir, now, there are certain words, there is a certain vocabulary used when we talk about children. There are like sponges, you can mold them in what you want them to be. But how does that nature versus nurture debate fit into this? When we're talking about children, their personality types, their temperament, how does that debate work in this instance?
So just to be clear, you're asking about how does nature or nurture, whether it's nature or nurture that really defines how kids develop their personality. And so I personally don't think it's a either or. There's been research that's been pointing toward both ends. That really it's about the DNA of the person and how it develops. But as that DNA expresses itself in the environment changes, and that gets and then there's a feedback loop from the environment to the individual. So really, I think they're both interconnected in that way. and just bringing it back to how a child's personality gets developed is, sure, they might have some ingrained traits that they bring with themselves, but also really it's about how those traits are nurtured in the environment and how they're dealt with.
Right. Yeah, sir, a question that's a little more broad. Now, do children also require, in some instances, therapy and professional help? Parents often fear that if they take their child to a therapist or a professional, that means there's something seriously wrong. Whereas adults, we understand that they have many stresses, many different things to battle with, and therefore it might be more acceptable. But is it true that parents need to sometimes reach out for professional help?
Yeah, for sure. See, we, as a parent myself, I was never taught how to be a parent. Yes, I did have examples in front of me growing up. I could read books, but it never happens experientially in the room, right? The children never gets to, there can be times when a child misses out on certain developmental milestones or things that a parent needs to do in order to provide that safety to that child. And in those instances, I personally feel that it can be even beneficial to really reach out to a counselor or any mental health professional if one feels that they really need some sort of help, guidance, assistance that can really help them with their relationship in terms of themselves and their.
Right. Professor Kinderman, I put this question to Yasir too, but I want to ask you the same thing in a different light. When we talk about children being able to develop certain traits, there's also a fear that children might develop a trait which will last with them for their entire lifetime. Now, in this instance, how can we figure out when and until when a child begins to develop certain traits that will be cemented forever? How does a child's mind work in that regard?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that when it comes even to personality types, newer research is suggesting that people are quite flexible in their personality traits right up until quite old age. And the other thing to remember is that although when you do complicated scientific experiments to try to work out whether each of us has a characteristic personality trait, we can find that. And what that means is that our behavior is somewhat predictable across situations. But that's once you've taken account of the fact that the scientists are trying to find those traits. So the way that we would behave on the terraces of a football match is completely different from how we would behave at a grandparent's birthday party, and is completely different from how we'd behave in the mosque. So people behave in different ways in different situations, and that's important for adults. It's equally important for children. So I think the idea of a fixed pattern of behavior dependent on somebody's personality is a little bit of a myth.
Right. Yasir, I talked to Professor Kinderman about the fact that children may not be able to express themselves in the way they want to, and that might then end into anger or aggression. But there are other environmental factors that might lead to children being agitated, might lead to children showing increasing signs of anger and aggression. Could you help us understand some of those environmental factors?
So just the top of my head, I'm just really trying to think, because you see, when you look at anger really comes from a sense of discomfort, a sense of disconnection with the environment, whether that's within the home, whether that's within the school. I'm also, so right now I'm also thinking, when a child goes to school and they feel misunderstood by their teacher. Whether it's because of a certain disability that they've been carrying or some other circumstances, they could really lash out just to make a point. Right? Other instances could include if they are in a situation where they are on the receiving end of somebody else's anger or some other unfair or unjust situation. That threatening situation could also require somebody to respond in an aggressive and an angry way.
Right. And in all of this, I think a parent needs to counsel their child, needs to intervene when there are behavioral problems that are being observed.
Yeah, I think as parents, first of all, I mean, even as a society, we need to really process our own anger, right? And not just our anger, but any emotion. We really need to know how we sit with our anger, whether we're able to identify that we're angry and things are going to get out of control, to really sort of bring ourselves down. It's kind of like when you're on the airplane, you need to put your oxygen mask first before putting it on the child. Something else is, just sitting and listening and just talking to your child and really listening to them, not advising them what they should or shouldn't do, because really that's also one of the causes of all this anger. But really just being there and just listening and allowing that anger to emerge and helping them process through.
Right. Professor Kinderman, as you stated before, different personality types, they change throughout time. People act differently in different circumstances in different places. But one thing that bothers a lot of parents is when they see their child acting aggressive or having anger, it's trying to understand whether this is a phase, whether this is just an emotion, this is them acting out, or this is a deeper problem that they need to address. Is there a way parents can figure that out? Parents can understand their child a little better?
I think it's very difficult. And some children do grow up to have great difficulties. I mean, teachers in schools obviously have to deal with disruptive children in their classrooms from time to time. And all parents want their children to grow up happy and loved by other children and helpful. I think it's worth just turning back to something that Yasir said, which is about the role of professional help. And just to remind people, really, that professional help is always useful, but it doesn't have to be a therapist directing their target towards the child and doing something to do therapy on the child. It could be working out what's happening in the child's environment that is causing them to be angry, and changing the environment, changing the schooling, addressing problems at home, situations that the child is dealing with which are coming out as anger, rather than assuming that the problem lies within the child and then worrying that unless the child is somehow fixed, the problem is going to last throughout that child's lifetime. I think that we need also, as well as focusing on therapy for the child, we also need to think people in the community, talking to people in the family, to change the situation that the child finds themselves in to solve the problem, rather than assuming that the fault or the problem or the illness even lies within the child. So a more situational and systemic approach than always worrying about, is there something wrong with my child and can I fix them? It's possibly more about looking at the school, looking at the family, looking at the home situation, and changing something about the circumstances rather than targeting the child. But should people be worried? Probably not, because we can change all of those things.
Right. Professor Kin, from what you said, another thing that came to my mind was this argument of how a parent needs to create a balance between coddling their child, in which they are eliminating certain threats in the environment, certain threats that are needed for a child to grow up and being able to cope with stress, being able to take on matters that are difficult, and then also helping a child through difficult situations by changing the environment. How can a parent find a balance between it? Because there is a lot of conversation that parents, especially nowadays, are coddling their children.
Sure, I'm not personally. I'm quite sympathetic to the idea of being kind to children. I think that even if we look around the world in politics, there are plenty of people who like pretending to be strong men, and personally, I think love is kind of quite a good thing, really. So I'm all in favour of coddling. I don't see many children who turn out to be terrible adults who have been loved too much by their parents. I see quite the reverse. So I'm in favour of coddling. The other thing is that we shouldn't put all of the emphasis, in the same way that we shouldn't put all of the emphasis on doing therapy on the child. We shouldn't put too much emphasis on it always being the parent's responsibility. There's a phrase, certainly in English, American English, if it takes a village to raise a child. And sometimes parents have to step back and allow grandparents to step in. And we also have to step back and allow teachers or even friends to come in. So if my child was angry and was angry at me, one of the things I'm going to have to do is to swallow my pride and allow my child to talk to somebody else about how they're feeling. So part of it is to reduce the pressure on parents to always fix the problem and say, sometimes turn to professionals, but also do talk to the teachers at school, talk to your neighbours, talk to grandparents, and take a step back sometimes, because if the kid is angry at you, keep on badgering them to talk to you about why they're angry at you might not be the best thing to do.
Right. Yasir, now Professor Kin made this point here that coddling is better because it, of course, is a sharing of love. It shows affection, and that might be a better route than being more strict. Do you also share that view?
You see, I don't think anger, anger really is about disciplining a child or he doesn't know how to behave. I think what somebody really wants when they're angry is really that sense of connection again, that sense of safety, really. And so if that means we need to work with the school, we need to work with the broader society, and not just the parent or just the child. Yeah, totally for it.
Right. Now, you mentioned here the word that that the child needs to be disciplined, but of course there are some instances, tantrums, certain things that happen that parents feel like that warrants a child to be disciplined. What methods and techniques do you feel, Yasir, work when parents try to deal with children, especially in disciplining them if they're showing anger or throwing a lot of tantrums?
So there are some cookie cutter ways that we can discipline our children, and really they revolve mostly around rewarded punishment, right? If you behave a certain way, you'll get this or that. That works until only in a limited way. What I can suggest is, in addition to these disciplining techniques, one could maybe also offer identifying with these emotions, with these difficult emotions, and then maybe writing down exactly what they feel they need to say or want, and even extended that to working out how they can effectively and usefully really get what they want without the aggressiveness or without the angry disruption that's going on.
Right.
But again, I would still like to say that it's really about containing that anger. I mean, as parents, that's one of our jobs. It's really to allowing that anger to come up and be expressed, and sit with that emotion.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Yasir, for joining us from Lahore, and Professor Kinderman for joining us from Liverpool. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next time with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.